and next presidency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Let me from the onset align myself with the earlier remarks made by the President of the Republic of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. South Africa commends His Excellency President Lula da Silva's call that as the G20 President for the reinvigoration of multilateralism and the reform of the global governance institutions to make it more representative and inclusive. We further thank Brazil for its innovative leadership in calling for this G20 meeting and inviting all members of the UN. We have just had a successful summit of the future where our leaders have adopted the Pact of the Future towards forging a new global consensus for the global community to be prepared for the future threats and challenges, in particular climate change, global finance architecture, and to make developments in artificial intelligence inclusive to the global south. We also welcome the fact that the Pact of the Future calls for the reform of the UN itself and also for the Security Council, which has always been a long-standing call of the African Union. This meeting today and this call to action further demonstrate the collective global solidarity in addressing current and future global challenges. South Africa will carry forward the momentum laid by Brazil on the reform of multilateral institutions. As the President Ramaphosa has said earlier this morning, South Africa has adopted the following theme for the G20 presidency: solidarity, equality, and sustainable development. This theme speaks to the development priorities of the Global South, particularly also including the African continent, which is now fully represented with the admission of the African Union in the G20. In pursuing this theme, South Africa will work to ensure that the G20 provides a strategic direction towards establishing a more equitable, representative, and fit-for-purpose international order. Our theme also confirms South Africa's intention to build on the efforts and successes of the G20 presidencies of Indonesia, India, and Brazil to ensure that the needs and interests and aspirations of the developing economies of the Global South and Africa in particular drives the overall G20 agenda going forward. Under our overarching theme, South Africa's priorities will include the following: developing the momentum and resuscitating our solidarity to accelerate efforts to achieve the SDGs and to work towards the aspirations and objectives of Agenda 2063 of the African Union. We will also work to implement the action platform to implement the Pact of the Future. We will also work in terms of predictable and sustainable financing for development and addressing the critical issue of debt vulnerability of many countries of the Global South. As we know, many countries in the Global South are forced to forego their developmental programs to service exorbitant debts. Poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment are common triggers for conflict and instability. The world should finance more development than wars. Creating consensus around reform of the international financial architecture, notably the multilateral development banks, which is critical to ensure that they become fit for purpose to adequately address sustainable development and transboundary challenges. Combating climate change, considering that developing the countries suffer disproportionately from the climate crisis, even though they are only responsible for a fraction of the global emissions. Global warming has devastating consequences for food security in developing countries. Addressing issues of predatory mining by some countries and corporations, especially in the quest for Africa's raw materials and critical minerals. South Africa will take forward the outcomes of the report of the UN Secretary General's panel on critical energy transition minerals. We'll also work on the strengthening of the multilateral trading system, the WTO, which constitutes the only multilateral body capable of managing divergences and coordinating position in global trade. Strengthening the multilateral trading system means moving forward with the WTO reform process, reinforcing the centrality of the development dimension, and particularly focusing on the reform of the dispute settlement pillar. What is needed is a functioning dispute settlement system that is also equally accessible to all member states. Other key issues we'll advance include issues of industrialization, employment and equality, and a universal social floor, food security, the blue economy, and cross-cutting initiatives on artificial intelligence. South Africa's G20 presidency will mark the end of the cycle of the G20 presidencies. We intend to undertake a review of the first cycle of the G20 presidencies. This is critical to ensure implementation. Brazil can count on us to maintain the momentum that we have already started with your presidency on the reform of the multilateral institutions. I thank you for your attention.
I thank Minister Ronald Lamola for his intervention. Minister
used to pave the way for the establishment of the institutions that we know today, such as the World Bank and the IMF. Since then, however, the world has changed enormously, and Africa now plays a major role on the international stage. And this is also in line with the 2063 agenda that Africa has. Now Africa makes up more than a quarter of United Nations members. And there are more than 1.4 billion people living in Africa, which is 17% of the global population. And 62% of those people are aged less than 25. So this is a demographic momentum which is very precious, not just for us within Africa, but also for the entire global community, in terms of the implementation of the energy transition, for instance. It is in this viewpoint that we welcome the appeal launched by the Brazil presidency for there to be a substantial reform of global governance. This initiative is being taken at a very critical time. We think that it's a very serious moment, and therefore the initiative should be fully supported, and we do fully support it. We particularly welcome the consensus that is being built about the need to reform the composition of the UN Security Council so that it can better reflect the major current geopolitical balance. We also need to beef up the role of the General Assembly and ECOSOC, while also ensuring synergies between peace-building efforts and regional initiatives such as the African Peace and Security Council. We also need to see reform of the international financial system. We welcome the progress that has been made, notably within the context of the IMF Governance Board, but we need to go further than this. We need to restructure the way in which debt is treated. The over-indebtedness of low-income countries is a major threat to the global economy, and it's a major threat to countries' resilience. This is something that needs to be borne in mind in the context of the WTO. Since the Doha process was launched, the views of African countries in particular have not been borne in mind enough, and so this process needs to be given new momentum, and this agenda needs to go much further. We're at a critical juncture for humanity. We're seeing an increase in geopolitical tensions. We're seeing the effects of climate change and the repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic and major global inequalities. They all demand that we work together. We welcome the outcome of the Summit of the Future, and we believe that there must be more specific negotiations to modernize our global governance institutions to tailor them better to the realities of the 21st century. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate the African Union's unwavering commitment to participate actively in these discussions in a spirit of cooperation and commitment. We call on the members of the G20 to show strong leadership. But as has been said, Africa holds a great deal of potential, human and energy potential. We're not just seeking assistance. We want to be a trustworthy partner on the international stage. We don't want to be seen as just seeking assistance. We want to contribute to building a much more prosperous and much more equitable world. The 80th anniversary of the United Nations is coming up next year. This is an opportunity to give humanity a gift when it comes to addressing the major global challenges. This is the ambition that we have, and we think that if by working together we can make progress on these aspects: inclusivity, equity, and a much more consistent global architecture which will bring about peace and development. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the African Union, and now I give the floor to